If you did believe that God was a necessary being, that you literally could not imagine a universe in which God did not play an important role, in order logically for me to refute that belief, all I need to do is to invent a universe in which God does not exist.
Invent a universe in which God does not exist.
So according to Sean Carroll, all we have to do in order to show that a conscious creator is not necessary to the existence of a universe is consciously create a universe. Does anybody else see the problem with this? And we're back. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. We're going to discuss the creation of the universe and what were the steps that were taken to give rise to the structures and perspectives that we see today. Now, as you can see by the very first clip, Sean Carroll believes that you can get a universe if you have a creator create it, but then also you will be able to create a universe that doesn't require God. So a conscious creator can create a universe that doesn't require God. This doesn't make any sense. I'm struggling. But that's because it makes no sense. So God created the universe. Let's just assume for the sake of argument. How would he do it? And would it give rise to the structures that we described in the previous video of the quantum of consciousness and the various aspects of quantum mechanics and the particle structures that we see in quantum physics and beyond quantum physics? Because there's actually nothing beyond quantum physics, but beyond quantum physics as we define quantum physics. But how would he do it? By the way, just letting you know, forewarning, this topic today is way more complicated than even the last topic. So, give yourself some grace, give me some grace in trying to describe it. So first, let's recap the last episode. So on the last episode, we discussed the source code right here, which is a quantum of consciousness, which is a 9-dimensional or 9-event structure that has 6 fundamental perspectives in it, which are actually just, another way of looking at the 4 fundamental perspectives, which are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. We've split up oneness into a triality of oneness within, oneness without, and singularity, and inside, outside, and separate are also a triality. So we have what is called a binary triality. It's 2 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 2, and it's equal to 6. We discussed how if you want to see the entirety of a room and you're a spinning head in a room, you spin 360 degrees horizontally and you see 4 walls. And if you want to also see the subjective and objective perspective that you are relative to, not just the plane that you're on, then you spin 360 degrees vertically, which now you see the floor and the ceiling, which is the objective and the subjective perspectives. And this totals to 720 degrees. And, we touched on the universal life cycle right here, which is a universe within a universe, within a universe, within a universe. And each time we go down one, it is within the one above it. It's a 720 degree structure with these periods of growth that start with force point, particle, atom, molecule, cell, organism, family, caste, and technological singularity. And then a force point is an assembly of information and energy, which gives rise to an atom, which is an assembly of force points, which force points are the elementary fermions, if you remember from the last episode. The assembly of particles is an atom, or is an atom. The assembly of atoms is a molecule. The assembly of molecules is a cell. The assembly of cells is an organism. The assembly of organisms is a family. The assembly of families is a caste. And the assembly of castes and tribes is a technological singularity. We will show that later. So that's where we're at. How do we get this? All of this simply from, as well as this, the fundamental source code and the universal source code, simply from, the non-existence of these two. So before we do that, we have to reimagine 1 and 0. And so that will take me to my paper. Remember that my theory and the title of my paper is The Entangled Quantum Force, the Theory of Everything for Everyone, because I'm trying to do this philosophically instead of just using terms in high-level mathematics and terms in high-level quantum physics. But we're going to have to touch on both because quantum physics, philosophy, and mathematics, aka geometry, are all the same. So the abstract of my paper, once again, or of my theory, once again, is that the universal objective source code of existence in all of its fundamental manifestations is a quantum of consciousness. A quantum of something is an individual and irreducible point or particle representative of a given entity, which in this case is a consciousness. A quantum of consciousness is an assembly of entangled perspectives. Given that perspectives can only come from a consciousness, and a consciousness can only come from perspectives, it would seem that a quantum of consciousness and its entangled perspectives are simultaneously the creation of and creator of each other. This pattern results in the creation and union of a singular head or mind point of consciousness on top of an assembly of entangled body points of perspective. This united head-body pattern of singularity manifested on top of an entangled assembly of fundamental perspectives is the universal source code of existence and is present and repeating on all scales of the universe and in all fields of study. And then I said, before the beginning, consciousness existed, existence was conscious, and consciousness was one. Notice that this is a singular being, a singular consciousness, described from 3 perspectives. Before the beginning, consciousness existed. Existence was conscious, and consciousness was one. So we're going to discuss that today. Why can we see it like that? In the New Testament, it says, John 1:1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. My paper says, before the beginning, so we're even before that, consciousness existed, existence was conscious, and consciousness was one. The fermions are all manifested in trialities, and we see this in space with length with height. We see this in time with past, present, future. And these form 2 binary trialities of 6, where space-time is past, present, future, length with height. 6, just like what Roger Penrose said. But not only Roger Penrose. There's this clip of Eric Weinstein that I'm going to show you where he's talking to Lex Friedman, and he's like, Lex is like, explain perspective, not explain perspectives. That's technically what it is, but he's like, explain dimensions. And he's like, when you take a bite of jalapeno and you've got your sweet receptors and your sour receptors and your bitter receptors and your heat receptors and your pain receptors, these add up to 6 receptors and 6 perspectives, 6 dimensions, and you're having a 6-dimensional experience every time you take a bite of something, is what he says. And I'm going to play it now.
One of the things you've done is try to explore a unified theory, talking about a 14-dimensional observerse that has the 4D space-time continuum embedded in it. I'm just curious how you think, and how philosophically at a high level, about something more than 4 dimensions. How do you try to, what does it make you feel talking in the mathematical world about dimensions that are greater than the ones we can perceive? Is there something that you take away that's more than just the math?
Well, first of all, stick out your tongue at me. Okay. Now, on the front of that tongue,
Yeah.
there was a sweet receptor.
Mhm.
And next to that were salt receptors on 2 different sides. A little bit farther back, there were sour receptors. And you wouldn't show me the back of your tongue where your bitter receptor was.
Show the good side always.
Okay. But that was 4 dimensions of taste receptors. But you also had pain receptors on that tongue and probably heat receptors on that tongue. So let's assume that you had 1 of each. That would be 6 dimensions. So when you eat something, you eat a slice of pizza, and it's got some hot pepper on it, maybe some jalapeno. You're having a 6-dimensional experience, dude.
So I don't think that I'm the only one that's come to this, given Roger Penrose's idea of 6-dimensional space-time, and Eric Weinstein is correctly identifying a binary triality right here. And I'm going to show you that it's everywhere. So first, let's start with the part of my paper titled Reimagining Zero and Infinity. In order to further describe this entangled quantum force and show that it is a quantum of consciousness built on an assembly of entangled perspectives, we must first reaffirm our basic understanding of being. Where did existence come from? How does something come from nothing? This seems to be an eternal debate, but it truly needn't be. In order to see why, we must first challenge some of our most basic understanding of algebra and math in general. From the beginning of our scholastic mathematical education, we are taught that 0 is equal to nothing. This means that 0 is equal to non-existence. This is impossible because non-existence doesn't exist, and no number can represent that which doesn't exist. It doesn't even make sense for 0 to be a placeholder for non-existence in mathematics, as non-existence is no place, so it cannot even have a symbolic placeholder represented by a number. Even if it could, it would be useless, since multiplying, dividing, subtracting, adding, squaring, or applying any other type of calculation to any number by nothing is a non-action, and so the value of any calculation by something by non-existence or nothing is non-existent, aka a non-calculation, and mathematics is the calculation of the value of actions of quantized existence. If 0 cannot have a value of nothing, then what is the true value of 0? The true value of 0 can be seen when we sum all possible numbers. When we sum all possible positive and negative numbers that could exist, the sum will always be equal to 0. This means that 0 does not equal nothing. It instead means that 0 is equal to everything. Therefore, the true value of 0 is equal to infinity. Given the assumption that 0 is equal to infinity, if we now try and divide something by 0, it is no longer an impossible non-action, despite what your calculator will still tell you. Now that 0 is equal to infinity, dividing any number by 0 is now an infinite division of that which is being divided, and therefore an infinite action. That means that anything divided by 0 is equal to infinity. The only exception to this is 0 divided by 0, aka infinity divided by infinity, which equals 1. Infinity is a number that encompasses all that exists, 0, all that has existed, negative numbers, and all that will exist, positive numbers. 0 represents all past, present, and future states of existence, and even with this apparent endlessness, existence has a seemingly almost unique quality, that is that it has inherent and complete oneness. This is simply because existence encompasses all that exists and therefore inherently is separate from and excluding of that which is non-existent. This is due to the fact that anything which is non-existent simply cannot exist and therefore does not exist. The only other thing that objectively has inherent oneness without an outside observer to perceive the oneness of an entity is a consciousness. Since 0 is equal to infinity and existence is inherently 1, it stands to reason that we can also set the value of 0 not only to equal infinity, but also as equal to 1. This idea seems paradoxical when we apply it to something that we are familiar with within existence, but the conceptualization of infinity is not something we are even capable of observing in anything we are familiar with. While this idea may seem like a paradox, it actually is not. In fact, this idea makes perfect philosophical sense when considering the properties of a quantized existence. This idea of infinite oneness fits even more perfectly when applied in regard to the assertion of this paper, which is that existence is a single quantum of consciousness composed of an assembly of fundamental perspectives that are simultaneously the creator/animator of and the creation/animation of each other. This binary singularity is locked in a singular yet endless loop. This is because a perspective requires a conscious perceiver, and a conscious perceiver must have multiple entangled perspectives to perceive and be conscious of. But more on that later. This new perspective doesn't just invalidate the argument that you can get something from nothing, it invalidates the entire debate. This entire discussion throughout the millennia has been moot since the argument itself is wrong. The question should not have been how could something have come from nothing. The question should have instead been, can nothingness even exist at all? And no, it can't. What this renewed understanding of the nature and structure of existence tells us is that nothingness doesn't exist, nothingness has never existed, and nothingness will never exist. It also tells us, due to the inherent nature of existence itself, that not only does existence exist in the present, but it always has existed, and it always will exist. Existence objectively exists in an ever-present and eternal state. We will examine this further when describing the nature of space-time later on. Given that 0 is equal to infinity, and that the entirety of existence is inherently one, if it is a consciousness, the 6 equations to describe the most fundamental nature of existence are as follows. Anything divided by 1 is equal to itself. Anything times 1 is equal to itself. Anything divided by itself is equal to 1. 1 times 1 is equal to 1. Anything except 0 divided by 0 is equal to infinity. And anything times 0 is equal to infinity. Notice that these fundamental equations break down to a binary triality, aka 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3. This is consistent with the universal source code that this paper will describe that appears to occur in all aspects of existence and all fields of study. All of the above considered, it can be deduced that the value of the totality of all that is, all that was, and all that will be in existence is expressed as existence is equal to infinity, or 1 is equal to 0. What we can see is that 1 is equal to 0 encompasses the inherent oneness and infinite potential of existence itself. A point is often thought of as a zero-dimensional shape, but given the above, we now know that a zero-dimensional shape is really an infinite dimensional shape. Now that the concept that existence is simultaneously equal to infinity, 1 and itself, has been mathematically described, we can use this renewed understanding of the mathematical nature of existence as a cornerstone from which to construct a model of the process and structure of the universe, the multiplicity we see within it, and the infinite singularity that gave rise to it. Okay, I'm going a little fast because I recorded this video previously and I was really struggling with what to say in certain points. So bear with the speed, slow it down if you need to, but I've already done this like 3 times. Bear with me. So remember, we have the universe constructed of the source code. The source code is a quantum of consciousness. The universe is a universe, and it's part of a multiverse chain that is a double helix. And what this is it's a fiber bundle, okay? And when you're looking at a quantum of consciousness, which is just a particle, what you see is a fiber bundle on the outside, from the outside in. But from the inside, what you see is a double helix. It's a Hopf vibration, essentially, looking at itself from the inside out and the outside in at the same time, so spinning inside out and outside in at the same time. That's why you're getting 720 degrees of rotation. And inside, you're seeing a double helix of spiraling, because it's looking at itself from the inside out and the outside in at the same time, but because it's looking at itself, it's a spiral. So imagine a dog chasing its own tail. This is why we see DNA spiraling, and this is why you see, spiral everywhere, because the universe and you and the multiverse chain itself, and which is all of creation, it's all, and even God, it's all of dog, maybe God. I don't want to cross that line, but maybe God. It's all a consciousness trying to understand itself from the inside out and the outside in at the same time, and therefore looking at itself, and therefore a dog chasing its own tail. So remember that the quantum of consciousness is, 9 dimensions with a binary triality within those 9 dimensions, and it sums to 33 because it's a 3x3 grid that ends in a self-reflection, and a 3x3 grid, when it sees itself in the mirror, sees 3 twice, which is 33. It's not E-word, just is. So we're also seeing 3, 6, and 9, which are right here and here and here, which is exactly what Tesla said, that we would see when we understood the universe. You would see 3, 6, and 9. So why are we seeing 3, 6, and 9 within this 9-dimensional shape? Because when you take a whole, which would be 9, 1/3 of it is 3, and 2/3 of it is 6, and the whole is 9. So I'm going to show you this binary triality, which is the 6 perspectives of the quantum of consciousness, which is singularity, inside of inside, separate, outside of oneness, oneness within, inside of inside of outside, inside, separate, and oneness, oneness without, which is outside of outside, and outside, which is separate from oneness. And this is 2 sets of 3, 1, 2, 3, and that's one set, and then these white ones are another set, or 3 sets of 2, which is singularity and separate, oneness within and inside, and oneness without and outside. These line up perfectly with these fundamental equations that I just described in my paper, which is anything divided by 1 is equal to itself, anything times 1 is equal to itself, anything divided by itself is equal to 1, anything times 1 is equal to 1, anything except 0 is divided by 0 is equal to infinity, and anything times 0 is equal to infinity. We see this pattern everywhere. What it is, it's an objective and subjective perspectives on triality. And you can see this in the mathematical order of operations right here. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. What's interesting is when you look at this, the one in black is usually in some way the sum of all of the previous. So parentheses includes everything within it. It's the sum of everything within it. The aspects of equations right here. And granted, remember that I'm not an expert on every field that you're about to see, so I did my best, and this is a work in progress. The numbers right here, complex and real, irrational and rational, integers and whole, the transformations, vertical and horizontal compression, vertical reflection that are vertical and horizontal translation. Remember when I said floating head in a room, you need to see every part of the room. You spin 360 this way, you see all 4 walls, and then you spin 360 vertically, and you see the floor and the ceiling to see the subjective and the objective, as well as the plane that you're on, which would be 4. And so here you're seeing subjective and objective, which is vertical and horizontal. And you're also seeing, the triality, which is what we see, everywhere. You're seeing it here in space-time, present, height, future, length, past, width. Past, present, future, length, width, height. Space-time represented as 6-dimensional. Seeing it in matter, you have consciousness at the top, which is what every quantum particle is. Actually, it's a fiber bundle, which is a consciousness, and you have consciousness at the top because it's the sum of everything. And below you have gas, liquid, and solid, which are 3 states of matter that are increasing in mass scale, just like what we see with the the fermions right here, an electron, a muon, a tau. Tau is a heavier electron. A solid is, it's a heavier state of matter than gas. And you see consciousness, plasma, and Bose-Einstein condensate, and the others. We're going to talk more about this because that's in another episode, but it's interesting. But those three have a degree of self-animation to them. You have also the fundamental solids, which is a sphere, an icosahedron, a cube, a dodecahedron, a tetrahedron, and an octahedron. Another binary triality. The elements of design, texture, color, space, value, line, form, volume, shape. Color mixing. When you use a printer, it is you use magenta, cyan, and yellow. When you are looking at a screen like you are right now looking at me, if you look very closely at those pixels, you will see that they are a red, a blue, and a green. Somehow they mix to form every color that you could imagine. The primary colors and the secondary colors are yellow, red, and blue, as well as green, orange, and purple. You can see it manifests in language. We have nouns / pronouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, interjections, and prepositions / conjunction. Like I said, I'm not an expert on all these things, so bear with me. But you get the point. This is everywhere. Aristotelian elements of drama, there's 6. When you learned about rocks in school, you see igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. I sat there and I was like, well, I bet you there's also a binary aspect to it. Of course there is. It's platonic igneous, volcanic igneous, clastic sedimentary, and chemical sedimentary, foliated metamorphic, and non-foliated metamorphic. You see it in the vertebrates, humans, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. You see it in invertebrates, which are arthropods, annelids, which are worms, mollusks, echinoderms, which are like sea urchins, and porphyrians, which are sponges. You see it in the kingdoms of cellular life. You see it in the nutrients in our body. You see it in the food groups that we, categorize: meat, grains, dairy, vegetables, oil, and fruits. You see it in DNA and RNA. You see it in the amino acids in DNA and RNA. You see it in religion: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. You see it in sex and gender, which is, intersex male and female, and queer masculine and feminine. You see it in the nuclear family with father, grandfather, mother, grandmother, child, grandchild. And you also see it in our castes, which I said that I was going to discuss. This is the castes. You see king / president, priests / scientists, lords / elected officials, artists / craftsmen, enforcers / soldiers, and laborers. What's interesting is that, like I said before, that this is the subjective and the objective, creating the binary aspect of these binary trialities. You can even see this in the castes that make up our society, because if you look here, the white of priests and scientists, artists and craftsmen, and laborers, these are all not government entities. The king / president, the lords / elected officials / appointed officials, and the enforcers / soldiers, or cops and soldiers, these are all government entities. So it's these 3 are government entities, and these 3 are not. And, you even see the increasing of mass scale in religion, because Judaism is a religion that doesn't proselytize, ideally. And it just requires you to be self-motivated in order to convert. It's very light. It doesn't, in its force that it impacts on the world, even though people will say, oh, the Jews, I'm talking about the faith. I'm talking about the religion. Christianity proselytizes. knocks on everybody's door, says, have you heard the good news? But it doesn't try to proselytize through the sword today, ideally. Okay, we're talking about ideals. It just tries to convince you. It's like the business, the company, trying to convince you to buy the product. Judaism is the scientist trying to invent the product. And Islam is the government forcing you to accept said product. It believes that, you should convert if you, on your own accord, if you believe in it. You should convert because they convinced you that this was the truth. If you, don't convert on your own accord. But if you don't convert on your own accord or because they convinced you, eventually it tries to force you to convert because it is the heaviest in its force that it inflicts on society. So it's an increasing in mass scale, just like, the fermions. You see this in, your limbs. You see this in the leptons, which is the electron, neutrino, the electron, the muon, neutrino, the muon, the tau, neutrino, and the tau. The fermions, quarks, which are up, down, charm, strange, truth, and beauty. And you see this in your senses. This is probably the most interesting one, is that you have 6 senses. And everybody's always like, what's the 6th sense? Well, the 6th sense is the sum of all of the senses below it. So it is your emotions/thoughts, and they take place in your brain, your senses and your sense organs. So below that, you have sight, taste, smell, touch, and hearing. They sum to the 6th, which is your emotion and thoughts. And these correspond to your eyes, your tongue, your nose, your skin, and your ears, and they sum to your brain or your mind. What's interesting is that a consciousness is an entanglement of perspectives, which is a fiber bundle, like this, which looks a lot like a brain. It looks like an entangled bundle of fibers, of perspectives. And another way of interestingly viewing the senses here is that sight, smell, and hearing are all senses used to perceive things that we don't view as touching us directly. You perceive your sight and your hearing and your smell are to perceive things that are separate from you, versus your taste and your touch and your emotions and thoughts, which all help you perceive things that are literally touching you. Okay, your emotions and thoughts literally touch you in a dimension that you just can't perceive, and it's not E-word. I did a video on the E-word. You can look at it. Don't ever say it. It doesn't apply to anything. It just is. And in order to taste something, it has to touch your tongue. In order to touch something, to feel touch, you have to physically touch it. And it's true that your emotions and your thoughts are something is physically, it's really touching you, I'll say. I won't say physically, even though I would say there's no difference at this point, but it's really touching you. And the others are removed in some way. There's a disentanglement or gap in entanglement between you and whatever it is that you're perceiving through the three of sight, smell, and hearing. So, another way of thinking about this is your emotions and thoughts, your taste and your touch are all objective perspectives. They are objectively true to you, versus sight and smell and hearing are all subjective because they're taking place in subjectivity land. Okay, they're taking place in relativity land. They can't actually manifest outside of relativity, whereas taste, touch, and emotions and thoughts can. We even say things like, that's just my taste. We're not even talking about like taste when in regards to food. We're talking about, your preferences. Or when they say, well, something touches you. That painting really touched me. It's like, okay, it touched your emotions and your thoughts. This is an objective perspective. And it's even clear in our vernacular that we understand this even in the back of our minds. I'm not going to say subjectively. But there you go. This is the binary triality. It exists everywhere. And now we're going to talk about where it comes from. Not just where this comes from, but where everything comes from. Where it comes from is God. Unlike what Sean Carroll was saying, it is essential that we think about it like this, that there is a God that created the universe, a consciousness that created the universe. And I would definitely say that if it works, that when we think about it like this, then it suggests that it's also just true. So here is my map of creation. And this looks very complicated. So I'm going to try and explain it. But I want you to imagine yourself as God. And you're just a consciousness. And you're all that exists. There is no time. There is no space. There is no other consciousnesses. It's just you and you. And there's nothing else. There's no other place at all. And in order to answer this question of how was the universe created, who created it, where did it come from, we have to actually ask the 6 fundamental questions, which are who, what, where, when, why, and how. This is another binary triality. And it's a fundamental binary triality. So if we assume God is the who, he's also the what, which would be in this case a consciousness. And where is God, because he is the dweller and the dwelling. Why would be for the same reason that all consciousnesses do anything. Meaning, if you are God and you are all that is, then if you're searching for meaning, you will realize that meaning comes from your effect on other consciousnesses. Because if you're all that is, then you're all that matters. You're all of matter. And if you're all of matter, then you're all of matter that matters. And if all that matters and all of matter is just consciousness, then your impact on other consciousnesses is where meaning comes from. It's not self. You can't do it. You can't invent your own meaning. God created meaning for himself by creating multiplicity of consciousness within his oneness of consciousness. Because even if you're God and you're all that is, even then you have no meaning if you are all that is. But as soon as you create multiplicity of consciousness and you're the creator of multiplicity of consciousness, you're everything at that point. You're no longer meaningless. You are all that matters. So literally all that matters. You're the maker of matter. So now we have why. And we have to get to the how. And this map shows us the how. So imagine you are God and you have to create within yourself creation, multiplicity of consciousness within your oneness of consciousness, a universe, or the start of a multiverse chain, double helix chain, which would be a universe. How do you do it? Well, you have to give a little energy towards your creation in order to animate it. And because God is one at this time and there's nothing else, then you can't divide your energy by like 6.2%. You have to do it by whole numbers, and you have to do it, you kind of just try it in an order, I guess. You would test it. So if God tried to divide his energy by 1, then he would give all of his energy to his creation his creation would have the same energy that he had prior, and he would have no energy left over. He would die, and nobody would sustain creation. And maybe it would be self-sustaining because he gave it all his energy, but the reality is that now we just have oneness of consciousness again, no multiplicity, and there's no meaning, and this was all for nothing. It's kind of like when Kylo Ren gives all of his energy to Rey in the last Star Wars, and then he dies. This is like that, but there's no one else left outside of it. So it would be a meaningless act, essentially. So then we have to test the next one, which is 2. Try and divide yourself by 2, your energy by 2. You end up with your creation requiring 50% of your energy, and you being left over with 50% of your energy. So once again, it takes all of your energy to put it into creation, and you can't do anything with this because it's kind of like when you're on an airplane and it says, please put your mask on first, and then you can assist little kids. God has to put his mask on first. And that means he has to have more energy left over after the act of creation than he put into creation in order to sustain himself and creation. And so the next one is he tries 3. Divides his energy by 3. And voila, 1/3 of his energy goes into creation, and 2/3 is left over for him, which means that he's still sovereign over his creation because there is no conflict of power. 2/3 is more than 1/3, and therefore it doesn't matter what happens in the universe. There is no challenging his power, and he can also animate it and himself and have plenty left over. But this is an equation that works. All of a sudden, we get a stable creation, and this model shows this. So, we have 0 and 1 dividing itself into a triality right here, and you can see the sum is 1. Now you can see the sum is 1 right here, and you can see that it's still, though, it's 3. And you get 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, which is 33. So, but you're left with 2, which is, count 2, of the 3 for God, which would be this cube right here. And then 1/3 of his energy is put into creation. So I have this math equation here testing this idea to see. I wrote it to return true if creation is less than the value of what is left over from the division. So if this is less than, a number here is less than a number here, you get true. So when we tried, 1, we don't get that because giving all of his energy to creation, you're still with oneness of consciousness. Half and half doesn't work because it's not less energy to drive creation than is left over. And when we divide ourselves by 3, we get 1/3 and 2/3, and the answer returns to be true. So now we know that right here is where creation becomes stable. And what's interesting is that also this sums to 4. Remember I said 4 is the number of stability. You get 1, 2, 3, and 4, and on the 4th, right here, with 4, where the sum is 4, we get stability. We get 1/3 of the energy going towards creation, and we get 2/3 being left with God, and the sum of all of these together is 4. So we get a stable structure of creation and creator, universe and God. And I have all of these numbers here calculating, the average, the sum, and the count of different aspects or perspectives on the numbers that are manifested here. What you can see is that this is one perspective on creation. This is another perspective on creation. This is creation. And once again, you see here a count of 4 this time and a sum of 1 right here. So what we're seeing is a oneness of consciousness created in creation via this act of division by 3, giving of 1/3 of energy. So you're seeing all of these symmetries. You're seeing 4 here as the sum of these. And these. Well, it's the count of here and the sum of here. Well, it's the count of here, the sum of here. What's interesting, this 4 is the sum of these, and it is the count of here. But what's interesting is that the sum of these 3, as you can see right here, is 6. So we're getting 6 from one perspective, 4 from another perspective. This is kind of like what I said in the last video, is that they are the same from 2 different perspectives. We're also getting, here we're getting a count of 12 and a sum of 18. And then over here, we're getting a sum of 14, which Eric Weinstein said, 14-dimensional observers, and a count of 12. And then in here, we're getting a sum of 12 and a count of 9, just like the quantum of consciousness is, a count of 9. So when we go here, I was messing around and I realized that creator and creation are 2 different perspectives of what we're left with after God creates. So that sums to 2 perspectives. And you can see that here when we sum all of this, the red, which is creation and creator, we get a sum of 2 and a count of 6, interestingly enough. So I squared it, and because I multiplied it by itself, okay, because that's one of the fundamental equations. And you get 4, which once again is right here. Okay? And then I took creation from the 2 perspectives, right here and right here. And the 2 sums, which is 14 and 18. And the sum of these 2 is 32. And 32 divided by 2 is 16. And remember that we're dividing it by 2 because there's 2 perspectives right here, 1 and 2. Divided by 2 is 16. So the average is 16 each. Okay, so I tried to get the average value. So the average value is 16 of this, and the average value of creator and creation is 2. So with the creator, I squared it. But with the creation, I got the square root because it's a mirror. And we're looking for symmetries. So the square root of that is 4. So what's interesting is that this 1 is a division of 4 divided by 4, and this 0 is a subtraction of 4 minus 4. And so we get oneness and infinity in creation and creator. And we also get 4 and 4, which is equal to 8. And when we sum them, remember that there are 8 periods of growth. And we're going to talk about that in Bott periodicity, which we see in the quantum force, United Quantum Force Assembly in the last video. And when you add that to God, you get 9 right there. So now we're having 4 and 4, and 1 is 0, and 9. Okay? All stemming from from creation, where oneness is divided by 3, and creation is equal to 1/3, which 1/3 is represented by a percentage, is 33. And when we look at the quantum of consciousness that all things are made of, we're seeing this symmetry again. We're seeing 9 is the count. Interestingly enough, 19, which is 1 and 9. That's not E-word, it's an extra arithmetic symmetry. It's not just COVID. We're also seeing that it's a binary triality of, all of the fundamental perspectives are here, and they're just represented by numbers here. And we're seeing the 3, 6, and 9 that Tesla said we would see again. And the sum of which, all of this quantum of consciousness, this entangled knot of perspectives, is 33. So a 3 by 3 grid is seeing 33, and it's all coming from a structure that created it by dividing 1 by 3 and giving 1/3 of that energy, which is 33% to this. So we're seeing 33% of God's energy represented as 33. It's very interesting. It's not a coincidence. Okay? If the universe is deterministic and there is no God, and it's just this irrational universe, Sean Carroll model where everything is predetermined and there is no God determining it, then no number is a meaningless coincidence. None. Because it's all deterministic. And it's all stemming from a pattern. If God makes choices and gives rise to a structure that dictates the creation of our universe, then it's still not meaningless. No number is meaningless. So no matter what, no number is a meaningless coincidence. So if you're just going to dismiss this as, oh, that's just a meaningless coincidence, this is not your channel at all. See my video on the E-word. So we're also seeing 4 as the final representation of, the value of this calculation right here. We're seeing it here. And we recognize that this one's coming up and this one's going down. This is a symmetry. 9 ending in 4. 9 ending in 4. Not only that, when we sum these, we get 6. And this is 6 fundamental perspectives in a 9-dimensional event, essentially. And what's interesting is that if 33 represents self-awareness, because it's, the self-reflected, okay, the 3 by 3 quantum of consciousness seeing itself in the mirror. 42 is when we add 9. So when we take the 33 here and we add it to the count of 9, which is this, when we add the sum of the value of the calculation of self-awareness to the dimensions of the structure that it took place in, we get 42. And interestingly, 42 is described as the answer to life, the universe, and everything in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he said, the author just said, I'm pretty sure that he chose that number because it was, funny. But what's interesting is that when we look at the first page of the gospel, we see in the genealogy of Jesus, okay, these guys were clearly onto something, whether or not you believe in Jesus, because if I'm saying that the universe is the logos of God, the generative structure of existence, the child of God, then the highest being that is in creation is the universe completely. Then what's interesting is that in the first page of the gospel, it says there are 3 sets of 14 generations. And these 3 sets of 14 generations sum to 42. 14 plus 14 plus 14. And I noticed this pattern in my work as well. So if we're going to take you as a quantum of consciousness and the universe as a quantum of consciousness, and we're going to look at it, the value of you and the universe as 2 quantums of consciousness and all of the matter contained within it, which is the fermions, then when we make a map of that, you get this right here that I made. And you can see down strange bottom, up charm truth, electron neutrino, muon neutrino, tau neutrino, electron, muon, and tau. These are the fermions, the quarks and the leptons. And this is a binary triality, these and 6, and these are binary triality, which is 12, interestingly enough. And when we go to our model of creation, we're also seeing that creation has a sum value of 12, even though it takes place in a 9-dimensional event, essentially. So, fascinating. This is 12. So, but if we take you and the universe as 2 consciousnesses that are therefore matter, because all matter is a quantum of consciousness and a fiber bundle, then we get a 14, right here you can see the count, 14 dimensions. And I decided to try and look at this in as many ways as I could that were symmetrical, because you have to search for symmetries. And you can see this is 1, and it has 14 as the sum, and it's just looking at it all as one thing. Then if we look at the universe / graviton, which is just what I call the universe, as 1 quantum of consciousness, you as another, these 4 as 4, these 4 as 4, and these 4 as 4, then you get 1 and 4 and 4 and 4 and 1. They sum to 14. You can also do the universe and the first generation of all of the fermions, and that's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The center is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you and me, or me, looking out, plus the final generation of fermions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 5 plus 4 is 9, by the way. So this is 9. You looking out is 9, and the universe looking in is 9. Interestingly enough. But when you sum them, you get, once again, 14. So there are 3 ways to do this. 14 plus 14 plus 14 is equal to 42. This is all seen as 1. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 seen here, and 1 and 2 and 3 seen here. So 3 plus 5 plus 1 is equal to 9, right there. Another symmetry. So, Eric said it's 14-dimensional observers. So triality everywhere. First page of the Gospels, and also Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is the answer to life, the universe, and everything, apparently. But is that really true? Could 42 really be the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Interestingly enough, when we look at this pattern of the quantum of consciousness equaling 33, when we sum 3 plus 3 is equal to 6. It's a binary family. When we sum 4 plus 2, it's also equal to 6. It's another symmetry. So in some way, the value of 33 and 42 are the same, but they're a shift in perspective. One sees one side as equal to the other, and the other sees this side as not equal to the other. And, it shows right here. If 33 is the value of self-awareness, then 42 is the value of self-awareness plus awareness of the construct that created the self-awareness. It says in the Bible that wisdom begins with fear of God. What it really means is wisdom begins with knowledge of God. Not what God is, not where God is, not why, not how, not when, but who. The construct that you're in is a consciousness. And your awareness of that creates an objective-subjective duality of perspective. You are subject to that consciousness. And what this does is it creates a disproportionate perspective in what the value is of one of these beings, from our perspective, to the other. And when we look at 42, we see that 4 is twice the value of 2. 2 is 1/3 the value of the total of 6. This mirrors creation and recognizes the value of energy put into creation by a consciousness that I call God. And so if 33 is the value of self-awareness, then 42 is the value of wisdom. Not just inherent self-awareness, wisdom. Not just of who you are, but also of who you're in and who created you. So I'm going to get into the math even further of where we see these symmetries in the universe. But I kind of want to leave it at this because this was much more concise than my first go. So I hope that made some sense. I know it's very complicated. I'm going to try to find better ways of explaining all of this over time. But like I have said before, I really appreciate anyone who is sticking it out throughout the entirety of these videos. I definitely think that I'm onto something and that this model of creation seems to make a lot of sense. It seems to give rise to the structures that we see in the universe. It seems to create logical, mathematical structures as well. And I think that it also helps us understand ourselves and our place. And as I stated in my previous video, there's nothing that is E-word. And part of the problem with that E-word is that it implies that there's some things that are not really relevant to us. Some things like how the universe was created. But I deny that. I think that everything is relevant. And that includes how the universe was created. It is personally relevant to you. And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Or at least hear me out as much as you hear them out. Till next time.